Struggling, Dad brings son to hospital. Little boy points and says, "That's Mommy, but she's the CEO Millionaire." Rain lashed the windows of Seattle General Hospital, a November storm echoing the turmoil in Daniel Reed's heart. It was 8:47 p.m., the emergency room alive with hurried steps and hushed voices. Daniel, 35, a single dad and night shift taxi driver, held his 4-year-old son, Ben, tightly. Ben's small body was hot with fever, a bandage on his forehead from a fall down the stairs. Daniel's dark hair was messy, his eyes shadowed, but his grip was steady, a trace of his old life as a firefighter. "Stay with me, buddy," Daniel whispered, his voice rough yet gentle, weaving through the crowded waiting area. Ben, pale and drowsy, clung to his father's jacket, clutching a crumpled photo from Daniel's pocket. A woman in a navy coat hurried past, her blonde hair catching the light. Ben's eyes widened and he pointed, trembling. "That's Mommy," he shouted, his voice cutting through the hospital's buzz. Daniel froze, breath catching. He followed Ben's gaze to Isabella Moore, 31, a real estate CEO, standing in the hallway, heels skilled. Her face, framed by golden curls, paled as her green eyes met Daniel's, their past crashing in a single look. "Ben, no," Daniel said, voice cold. "Mommy's gone." "It's her," Ben insisted, waving the faded photo of Isabella, smiling 5 years ago, her blonde hair bright. "I saw her in your picture, Daddy." Isabella's hand covered her mouth, tears welling. "Daniel," she whispered, stepping forward. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pulled Ben closer, turning away. "We don't need you," he muttered, words heavy with hurt, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. Ben twisted, pointing. "Mommy's pretty like in the picture," he said, voice soft with hope. Daniel's heart clenched. He glanced back at Isabella, her eyes pleading. He looked away, her 4-year absence crushing him. At the check-in desk, a nurse took their details. "He'll be seen soon," she said, noting Ben's flushed face. Daniel sank into a chair, Ben curled against him, still holding the worn photo. It was all he had of Isabella, who left when Ben was a newborn, pushed by her family to chase a better life. Daniel, once a firefighter who braved flames, now drove taxis to survive, raising Ben alone. "Is Mommy coming back?" Ben asked, his voice piercing. Daniel's throat tightened. He wiped a tear from Ben's cheek, his thumb gentle. "Just you and me, buddy," he whispered, a promise that softened the nurse's eyes. Isabella lingered in the hallway, aching to hold Ben, but Daniel's stare stopped her. She was a CEO now, her name on skyscrapers, but guilt from abandoning them remained. A flood in Indonesia had stranded her, stripping everything but her will to survive. In the hospital's sterile light, she felt like the scared girl who'd left her family. Daniel carried Ben to the exam room as a nurse called them. He didn't look back, but the photo burned in his mind. Isabella's smile, a memory he couldn't release. The rain fell harder, drumming the windows, mirroring his inner storm. Ben's shout, "That's Mommy!" echoed in Isabella's ears. She stood frozen, knowing she couldn't escape the past. The rain had faded to a drizzle as Daniel Reed eased his battered taxi into the parking lot of their small apartment building on Seattle's outskirts. It was past midnight, the world heavy and quiet, save for the faint hum of streetlights. He carried his 4-year-old son, Ben, up the creaking stairs to their one-bedroom home, a cramped space cluttered with second-hand furniture and scattered toys. Ben, still weak from his fever, slept against Daniel's shoulder, a bandage on his forehead from a fall. Daniel's heart ached, not just from the hospital visit, but from seeing Isabella Moore, the ghost of his past, in that sterile hallway. He laid Ben on the narrow bed, tucking a worn blanket around him. The boy stirred, clutching a faded photograph of Isabella, her blonde hair glowing in a 5-year-old memory. Daniel's fingers brushed the picture, a pang of pain hitting him. He kept it for Ben, he told himself, but it also held the love he'd lost when she left, pressured by her family to chase a life he couldn't offer as a firefighter turned taxi driver. Across town, in a sleek, high-rise office, Isabella sat at her polished desk, the Seattle skyline glittering outside. Her laptop's glow lit her face, blonde curls tangled from a sleepless night. She opened a hidden drawer, pulling out a photo of her, Daniel, and newborn Ben smiling in a park. Guilt clawed at her. She'd built a real estate empire from nothing, but the cost was losing them. Ben's cry, "That's Mommy," had shattered her carefully built world, bringing back every regret. Isabella's hands trembled as she typed an email to Seattle General asking about Ben's condition. She didn't expect a reply, but she needed to feel closer to him. She'd already called the hospital's billing department, anonymously paying Ben's medical fees. She added a note. "I'm sorry I left." It felt small, inadequate, but it was all she could manage without breaking. Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He glanced at the screen, a hospital notification. The bill was paid, with Isabella's message, "I'm sorry I left." Anger surged. Did she, a millionaire CEO, think money could erase 4 years of absence? "What do you want, Bella?" he muttered, voice low in the empty room. "To pity us?" He wanted to demand the hospital return it, but Ben's soft breathing stopped him. The boy needed medicine, not his father's pride. He ran a hand through his messy hair, eyes burning with unshed tears. He rummaged through his jacket, finding a small plastic superhero figure from a gas station. Kneeling by Ben, who stirred awake, he said, "Look, buddy, a superhero. You're my hero, you know that?" Ben's face lit up, grabbing the toy. "I'm a superhero like you, Daddy?" he asked, then paused, eyes on the photo. "Is Mommy a superhero too?" Daniel's throat tightened. He forced a smile, brushing Ben's hair back. "You're the best hero I know," he said, sidestepping the question. Ben grinned, hugging the toy, but his next words cut deep. "Mommy's pretty, Daddy. Why doesn't she live with us?" Daniel pulled him close, heart aching. "I don't know, buddy," he whispered, voice breaking. Memories of Isabella's laughter, her touch, and the day she left flooded back. He'd been fearless in fires, but helpless against her family's demands. In her office, Isabella closed her laptop, staring at the photo. "I don't deserve to be Ben's mom," she thought, "but I have to try." She wanted to explain the flood in Indonesia, the years lost rebuilding her life, but would Daniel listen? Moonlight slipped through Daniel's window, pale and cold, casting shadows on the worn carpet. He sat by Ben, watching him sleep, the superhero toy in his small hand. Isabella's return weighed on him, a mix of old love and fresh anger, leaving him alone in the quiet night, grappling with the possibility of her place in their lives. The morning sun barely broke through Seattle's gray clouds as Isabella Moore stood outside Daniel Reed's apartment building, her blonde hair tucked under a scarf. Her heart pounded as she clutched a small gift box, wrapped in blue paper with a red ribbon. Inside were a set of superhero toys for Ben and a folded letter, her words of regret scrawled in careful ink. She hesitated at the door, her polished nails hovering over the buzzer. 4 years ago she'd left this life behind, pushed by her family's demands. Now, standing on the cracked steps of the rundown complex, she felt like an intruder. Daniel opened the door, his tired eyes narrowing at the sight of her. Ben was at daycare, and the apartment was quiet, save for the hum of a distant radiator. "What do you want, Bella?" he asked, his voice low and cold. "Ben doesn't need a mom who shows up after 4 years. Isabella's throat tightened, tears spilling over. I brought something for him," she said, holding out the box. "Please, Daniel." He stared at her, then took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Without another word, he closed the door, leaving her standing alone in the drizzle. Inside, Daniel set the box on the kitchen counter, his hands shaking. He opened it, finding the toys and a letter. He unfolded the paper, reading Isabella's words. "I don't expect forgiveness, Daniel. I just want Ben to be healthy and happy. I'm so sorry." His chest tightened, torn between anger and a flicker of something softer, memories of her laugh, her warmth. "Why now?" he muttered, his voice breaking. He wanted to forgive her, but the fear of being hurt again held him back. Across town, in her sleek office, Isabella sat with her assistant, Claire, her eyes red from crying. "I abandoned them," she said quietly. "I was trapped in that flood in Indonesia, lost everything, my papers, my way home. I built this life to survive, but I can't live without trying to make it right." Claire squeezed her hand, but Isabella's mind was with Ben and Daniel, wondering if she'd ever be more than a stranger to them. That evening, Daniel picked Ben up from daycare. The boy's eyes lit up when he saw the gift box. "Open it, buddy," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "Someone cares about you a lot." Ben tore into the wrapping, pulling out the superhero toys with a squeal. "Superheroes, like you, Daddy," he said, hugging a plastic figure. Daniel's heart ached, thinking of Isabella's tearful face. He managed to smile, ruffling Ben's hair, his thoughts drifting to the woman he'd once loved. The next day, Daniel agreed to meet Isabella at a small coffee shop near the hospital. He sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Isabella's blonde hair caught the morning light filtering through the window. "I need to explain," she said, her voice trembling. 4 years ago, my family forced me to leave you. They said I was throwing my life away. Then I got stuck in Indonesia during the floods. I lost everything, my ID, my phone. My way back to you. I had to start over." Daniel listened, his face unreadable, but his eyes softened as she spoke of clawing her way up from nothing to become a CEO. "I never stopped thinking about you and Ben," she finished, tears falling. He stayed silent, but the hardness in his gaze began to fade. Ben, sitting at the table with a juice box, suddenly looked up. "You're the lady in Daddy's picture," he said, scrambling out of his chair. He ran to Isabella, throwing his small arms around her. "You're my mommy!" Isabella sank to her knees, sobbing as she hugged him, her fingers trembling in his soft hair. Daniel watched, his heart twisting. He saw her sincerity, but the walls he'd built over 4 years held firm. Isabella stood, wiping her eyes, and met Daniel's gaze. She wanted to hold Ben forever, but she stepped back, respecting his boundaries. Daniel's hand rested on Ben's shoulder, protective but less rigid. The morning sun streamed through the coffee shop's window, casting a warm glow over the table, a faint spark of hope flickering in Daniel's chest as he looked at the woman who might still be part of their story. The late November air was crisp in the Seattle park, where kites danced against a pale blue sky. Daniel Reed sat on a weathered bench, watching his 4-year-old son, Ben, run across the grass, clutching a plastic superhero toy. Isabella Moore, her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail, knelt beside Ben, helping him set up a makeshift superhero headquarters with sticks and leaves. She'd convinced Daniel to let her spend time with Ben a few times over the past week, but he kept his distance, his arms crossed, his eyes guarded. The sight of her playing with their son stirred something deep, old love, new fear, but he pushed it down. Ben giggled as Isabella pretended to be a villain, dramatically falling when he defeated her with his toy. Daniel's lips twitched, almost a smile, but his thoughts were heavy. She's a CEO now, living in a world of skyscrapers, he thought. I'm just a taxi driver scraping by. How can I trust she won't leave again? The memory of her walking away 4 years ago, pressured by her family, still burned. Isabella glanced at Daniel, her green eyes searching for a crack in his armor. She laughed with Ben, but inside, she was unraveling. Do I even deserve to be here? She thought. After abandoning them, can I ever be Ben's mom? Or Daniel's? Anything? She'd rebuilt her life from nothing after the flood in Indonesia, but the cost was this family, and the guilt gnawed at her. Daniel stood, reaching into his jacket for a broken superhero toy Ben had dropped earlier. He'd spent the morning gluing its cracked arm back together, his calloused fingers careful with the tiny piece. As Isabella approached, he handed it to her, his voice low. Ben likes when you play with this one, he said, placing it beside her. "He says it's his favorite." Isabella's fingers brushed the toy, her heart swelling at the small gesture. She smiled, her eyes misty, and nodded. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered, moved by his quiet care. Later that week, Isabella invited Daniel and Ben to her office at Moore Realty, a gleaming tower downtown. She hoped showing them her world might bridge the gap, but Daniel's face hardened when she suggested it. "We don't belong in your world, Bella," he said, his voice sharp but steady. "You've got your empire. We've got our life." Isabella's breath caught, tears spilling over. "I just want to be Ben's mom, even if it's only for a day," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel looked away, his silence louder than words. Ben, oblivious to the tension, tugged at Isabella's hand. He held up a crumpled drawing, a crayon sketch of 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, Me, and Mommy. "Can you stay with us, Mommy?" he asked, his wide eyes hopeful. Isabella knelt, hugging him tightly, tears soaking into his jacket. "I want to, Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel watched, his heart twisting. The sight of Isabella with Ben sparked a warmth he hadn't felt in years, but the fear of her leaving again held him back. Isabella stood, wiping her eyes, and met Daniel's gaze. She wanted to reach for him, to promise she'd stay, but his closed-off expression stopped her. Daniel's hand rested on Ben's shoulder, protective, yet softer than before. He felt the pull of her sincerity, the echo of the love they'd once shared, but the walls he'd built were still too high. The park grew quiet as families headed home. A bright red kite soared above, caught in a gust, its string taut with the promise of freedom. Daniel watched it, his thoughts a tangle of longing and caution. Isabella lifted Ben, pointing at the kite, her laughter mingling with his. For a moment, the 3 of them were bound by that fleeting sight, a fragile thread of hope pulling them toward a reunion they all wanted but feared to trust. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a monitor beeping steadily at Seattle General. Daniel Reed lay in the bed, his left leg in a cast, the ache of a broken femur dulled by painkillers. He'd been driving his taxi through a rainy Seattle night when a truck ran a red light, slamming into his car. Now, at 3 a.m., the world felt fragile, his body bruised and his mind heavy. His 4-year-old son Ben slept in a chair nearby, curled up with his superhero toy, his small face peaceful despite the chaos of the night. Isabella Moore sat beside Daniel's bed, her blonde hair a tangled mess, her designer coat draped over a chair. She'd been in a boardroom finalizing a $1 million real estate deal when the hospital called about Daniel's accident. Without hesitation, she'd canceled the meeting, racing across town to be here. Now, exhausted, she'd fallen asleep, her head resting on the edge of Daniel's bed, her hand inches from his. Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He saw Isabella, her face softened in sleep, and his chest tightened. She gave up everything to be here, he thought, the realization cutting through his pain. Can I give her a chance? The years of hurt, her leaving him and Ben under her family's pressure, the silence that followed, battled with the sight of her now, vulnerable and present. He wanted to trust her, but the fear of losing her again lingered. Isabella's eyes opened, meeting his. She straightened, embarrassed, brushing her disheveled hair back. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice thick with worry. I couldn't stay away." Daniel's gaze softened, but he didn't speak. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers rough from years of hard work, closing gently around hers. "Thank you for staying," he murmured, his voice hoarse. The words were quiet, but they carried a weight that made a passing nurse pause, her eyes misting at the tenderness between the broken man and the woman by his side. Ben stirred, blinking awake. He climbed onto Isabella's lap, his small arms wrapping around her. "Mommy, don't go again," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." Isabella's breath hitched, tears streaming down her face. She hugged him tightly, her voice breaking. "I'm here, Ben. I'm not going anywhere, my sweet boy." Daniel watched, his heart softening. The sight of Ben clinging to Isabella, the trust in his son's eyes, chipped away at the walls he'd built. Isabella looked at Daniel, her green eyes pleading. She wanted to say she loved him, that she'd never stopped, but fear of his rejection held her back. Daniel felt the old love stirring, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, but he couldn't yet voice it. The pain of her leaving, the years of raising Ben alone, still lingered. Ben, nestled in Isabella's arms, looked up at her. "Daddy's a superhero," he said, his voice bright despite his tiredness. "He saved people in fires. Did you know that, Mommy?" Isabella's eyes widened, her gaze shifting to Daniel. She remembered the young firefighter she'd fallen in love with, brave and selfless, and realized he was still that man. "I know, Ben," she said softly, her voice full of awe. "Your daddy's always been a hero." Daniel's throat tightened, his hand still holding hers. He saw the way Isabella looked at him, not as a CEO seeing a struggling driver, but as the woman who'd once known his heart. The room felt smaller, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. The first light of dawn crept through the hospital window, painting the walls with a soft golden glow. It bathed Daniel, Isabella, and Ben in warmth, a quiet promise of healing beginning to take root. Isabella brushed a tear from Ben's cheek, her fingers lingering as she looked at Daniel. He didn't pull away, his grip on her hand tightening just enough to say he wasn't ready to let go, not yet. The late afternoon sun filtered through the worn curtains of Daniel Reed's small Seattle apartment, casting a warm glow over the cluttered living room. Daniel, 35, sat on the couch, his leg still in a cast from the taxi accident, a crutch propped beside him. The air smelled of pizza and cake, and laughter filled the space as a handful of neighborhood kids ran around, their paper superhero masks flapping. Isabella Moore, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, knelt on the floor, helping Ben, now 5, pin a makeshift cape to his shirt. She'd transformed the apartment into a superhero headquarters for his birthday, with streamers and balloons taped to the walls. Daniel watched Isabella, his eyes tracing the way she laughed with Ben, her CEO polish replaced by a genuine warmth. She's not just a CEO, he thought, his heart softening. She's Ben's mom. The realization hit him hard, mingling with memories of their past love and the pain of her absence. He wanted to believe she'd stay, that they could be a family, but the scars of 4 years lingered. Isabella glanced at Daniel, her green eyes catching the light. She smiled, but inside she wrestled with doubt. "Can I really be their family?" she thought. "After everything I've done, do I deserve this?" She'd spent the week caring for Daniel and Ben, cooking meals, reading bedtime stories, trying to prove she was here for good. But every time Daniel looked at her, she wondered if he'd ever trust her again. Ben bounded over, holding a string of plastic beads he'd strung together with a broken toy piece. "Daddy, give this to Mommy," he said, his voice bright. Daniel hesitated, then took the makeshift bracelet, his fingers brushing Ben's. He hobbled over to Isabella, who was stacking paper plates, and held it out. "Ben wants you to wear this," he said, his voice low and warm. "He says it's for his favorite hero." Isabella's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she slipped the bracelet on. She hugged it to her chest, tears pricking her eyes, and looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered, the gesture touching her deeply, a sign he was letting her in. The party grew louder, kids shouting as they played, "Superhero Rescue!" Ben grabbed Isabella's hand, then Daniel's, pulling them into the game. "You're the heroes, save the world," he declared, giggling as he handed them toy shields. Isabella pretended to fend off an imaginary villain, while Daniel, despite his cast, swung Ben onto his shoulders, making him laugh. The room filled with their shared joy, the sound wrapping around them like a promise. As the kids ate cake, Ben climbed onto Isabella's lap, his small hands sticky with frosting. "Mommy," he said, the words slipping out naturally. "Stay with me and Daddy forever, okay?" The room seemed to still. Isabella's eyes widened, tears spilling over as she hugged him tightly. Daniel, sitting nearby, felt his heart lurch. He met Isabella's gaze, and for the first time he smiled. A real, unguarded smile. "I want that too, buddy," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. The words hung in the air, a bridge between their fractured past and a hopeful future. Isabella's heart raced. She wanted to tell Daniel she loved him, that she'd always loved him, but she held back, waiting for him to be ready. Daniel felt his walls crumbling, the love he'd buried for years rising to the surface. He looked at Isabella, her blonde hair glowing in the fading light, and saw the woman he'd never stopped loving, now fighting to be part of their lives. Ben, oblivious to the weight of the moment, tugged them both into another game. "Superheroes save the world together," he shouted, leading them in a clumsy march around the room. Daniel and Isabella laughed, their hands brushing as they followed him, their shared glances full of unspoken promises. As the party wound down, the last of the kids left, and the apartment grew quiet. The setting sun painted the walls with hues of orange and pink, bathing the small space in warmth. Daniel, Isabella, and Ben stood together, cleaning up streamers, their laughter lingering. The light of dusk wrapped around them, a quiet reflection of the family they were slowly rebuilding, one moment at a time. The small Seattle apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the radiator and the occasional car passing outside. It was early December, and the evening chill seeped through the thin windows. Daniel Reed sat on the worn couch, his leg cast now replaced with a brace, allowing him to move more freely. Across from him, Isabella Moore perched on a rickety chair, her blonde hair catching the glow of a single lamp. Ben, their 4-year-old son, slept in the next room, his superhero toys scattered across the floor. The air between Daniel and Isabella was heavy, charged with the weight of a past they'd both carried too long. Isabella's hands fidgeted in her lap, her green eyes fixed on a coffee mug. "I need to tell you about Indonesia," she said, her voice low but steady. "After I left, my family sent me there for a job they thought would fix me. Then the flood hit. I was trapped in a village, no papers, no phone. I almost didn't make it." She paused, her voice breaking. "I fought to survive, built this life. But I lost you. And Ben." Her eyes met Daniel's, raw with regret. "Carol?" Daniel listened, his jaw tight. He saw the pain in her face, the same kind he'd felt driving his taxi through endless nights, raising Ben alone. "Those nights," he said, his voice rough, "I'd drive until dawn just to keep going. I kept your picture in my wallet for Ben, I told myself." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the faded photograph of Isabella, smiling in a sunlit park 5 years ago. He slid it across the table. "I kept it because I never stopped loving you," he said, his words quiet but heavy. Isabella's breath caught, tears spilling as she clutched the photo, her fingers trembling against its worn edges. The gesture, simple yet profound, made her heart ache with hope. Daniel's thoughts churned. She fought like I did, he realized. We both wanted to protect Ben, in our own ways. The anger he'd held for years softened, replaced by a longing to rebuild what they'd lost. But the fear of her leaving again lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. Isabella's heart raced. Daniel's my home, she thought, even after I walked away. She felt his love in the photograph, in the way he looked at her now, but she waited, afraid to push too far. She wanted to say she loved him, that she'd spend her life making things right, but she needed him to meet her halfway. Ben's small voice broke the silence as he shuffled into the room, holding a crayon drawing. "Look, Daddy, Mommy," he said, climbing under the couch. The paper showed 3 stick figures, Daniel, Isabella, and Ben, under a bright sun. "Our family's bigger now," he said, grinning. Daniel and Isabella exchanged a glance, their hands brushing as they reached for the drawing. They smiled, a quiet warmth passing between them, and their fingers lingered, intertwining briefly. Daniel's heart opened, the walls he'd built crumbling. He wanted to tell Isabella he loved her, that he always had, but the fear of history repeating held him back. Isabella felt the love in his touch, the way his eyes softened, but she waited for him to speak first, respecting the pain he'd carried. Ben yawned, leaning against Isabella. "Can we be superheroes together?" he mumbled, his eyes heavy. Daniel chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "We're already a team, buddy," he said, his voice warm. Isabella tucked Ben closer, her smile trembling as she looked at Daniel. They sat together, the drawing between them, a fragile promise of what could be. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, their soft glow spilling through the window, casting a gentle light over the apartment. The lapping radiance danced across the walls, reflecting the hope growing in Daniel's heart. He looked at Isabella, her blonde hair glowing faintly, and saw not just the CEO or the woman who'd left, but the mother of his son, the love he'd never let go. The night stretched on, quiet but alive with the possibility of a new beginning. The Seattle apartment glowed with Christmas lights strung across the walls, turning the small space into a warm haven. It was mid-December, 3 months since Daniel Reed's accident, and life had changed. Daniel was back driving his taxi with a better schedule thanks to Isabella Moore's connections, giving him more time with their son Ben. Isabella, her blonde hair shimmering under the lights, had cut back her CEO hours to spend mornings with Ben and evenings with Daniel. In the living room, surrounded by tinsel and the scent of pine, they prepared for their first Christmas together in 5 years. Ben, now 5, bounced on his toes, holding a new family photo of the 3 of them in a park. "Let's hang it, Daddy." Daniel lifted him, his brace barely visible, and they pinned it beside the faded photo of Isabella from years ago, the 2 frames like a bridge between past and present. Isabella watched, green eyes misty. Earlier that day, Isabella had hosted a charity event at Seattle General, the hospital where Daniel once saved lives as a firefighter. She'd organized toy donations for families in need, a tribute to his courage and Ben's love for superheroes. Back home, the spirit of giving lingered. Daniel caught her gaze, his rough hand finding hers. "Bella," he said steadily, "I forgive you. You've given me and Ben a family again. I love you. Always have, always will." Her tears spilled. "Daniel, I love you. You and Ben are my home." Under the glow of the lights, they kissed. Ben clapped, giggling, "Yay, Mommy and Daddy!" Their laughter filled the room. Daniel reached for a small wooden frame from a bag. He'd carved their names, Daniel, Isabella, Ben, along the edges. "This is our future," he said, handing it to her. She hugged it close, her smile radiant, the gesture speaking of a love that had endured years of pain. Ben tugged her sleeve, holding a glittery star. "Mommy, Daddy, help me put this on." Daniel lifted him, Isabella steadied the star, and Ben placed it proudly. "You and Daddy are my superheroes," he declared, wrapping his arms around them. They hugged him tight, sealing the family they'd rebuilt. The lights twinkled, casting colors across the room, reflecting the joy of reunion. Daniel looked at Isabella, her hair catching the glow, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. She, holding Ben, saw the man she'd always loved, now her partner in this new chapter. Stepping back, Daniel said softly, "We didn't lose each other, Bella. We just took a long road to find our way back." She smiled, taking his hand. "And now we have the whole world." Ben, nestled between them, pointed to the tree. "Look, it's shining like us," he laughed. That week, Isabella's new foundation, Heroes Haven, launched to support struggling families at the hospital, a promise inspired by Daniel's selflessness and Ben's bright spirit. The apartment, once a place of survival, now hummed with life, its walls holding the story of a family made whole again. Outside, The Seattle nights sparkled, Christmas lights glowing like a beacon of their shared future, carrying the promise of a love that would never fade. As the Christmas lights twinkled in Daniel, Isabella, and Ben's cozy Seattle apartment, their story of love, forgiveness, and reunion reminds us that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and heart. From a chance encounter in a hospital hallway to a family reborn under festive glow, their journey shows the power of second chances and the strength of family bonds. We hope this tale of redemption and love warmed your heart as much as it did ours. If you were moved by Daniel, Isabella, and Ben's story, don't miss more heartfelt journeys like this. Subscribe to the Soul Stirring Stories channel for weekly tales that tug at your heartstrings and lift your spirit. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of dreamers and story lovers. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did this story mean to you? Let's keep the warmth of these stories alive together.